So this is Erin Mason with the School Counseling Interest Network of ACES, and I am definitely honored this morning to be speaking with Carrie Dimmitt and Elizabeth Villares. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, but they're going to be talking to us today about their Delphi study research, which we've heard about at the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference and the Innovations in School Counselor Preparation Conference recently. So I wanted them to be able to share some of the high points and some of the key points from their study. So perhaps, Carrie, can we start with you giving your introduction?
Sure. I am the Associate Director for the Frederickson Center for School Counseling Outcome Research and Evaluation at UMass Amherst, and I am a professor in the School Counselor Education Program. That's enough for now. Co-chair of the EBSCC conference.
All right, and Liz?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Villares, and I'm an associate professor at Florida Atlantic University. I've been there for just over 10 years and been working primarily with masters and doc students who are interested in being counselor educators and outcome research in school counseling.
Excellent. So, welcome to both of you. And just for the sake of the audience, we are recording this via Skype. So, we're technically trying to manage things from three different locations. And so, we'll have fun with that. But I think we'll go ahead and kick off the PowerPoint presentation. So, Liz, I think we're starting with you.
It'll be Carrie.
Excellent.
So the first thing we wanted to just give an overview about is what is a Delphi study. And a Delphi study is a qualitative method. It uses expert opinion. It surveys experts about their beliefs, their opinions. Typically, it asks people to think about critical issues, forecast what they think might happen in a profession, to try, and it's used to try and achieve some sense of consensus. It's particularly useful when there's a lot of different ideas and the goal isn't to come up with one thing. The goal is to sort of expand the ideas and open up what the possibilities are and then to establish some priorities in an area. It's often used around research funding, and other professions have used it as a way to think about what they want to focus on. So that's what our idea was. The first Delphi study was done 10 years ago. So the first Delphi study was called Critical School Counseling Research Questions, and it was published in Counselor Education and Supervision in 2005. And we had just started the Frederickson Center, and we were looking to see what priorities were in the profession about research. And then the current study, so the first study was done by me, Jay Carey, Wendy McGannon, and Ivar Henningsen. Wendy and Ivar were graduate students at the time. Jay Carey is the director of the C-SCORE. So this study is Liz and I. And the top 10 questions, the next slide shows the top 10 questions from 2005. And at that point in time, what was up in school counseling was certainly thinking about how does school counseling impact academic achievement, and specifically things like school dropout, school graduation rates, preventing school failure. If you look at question one, question two, and question four are specifically about academic outcomes. And then question three is about using data, because it was also a relatively new idea in those days. How do we use data? How do we get on board with the use of data that's happening in schools? And then the other interesting thing about 10 years ago is that we were really just coming into working with the ASCA national model. It was relatively new, and there were a couple of different models. So there was results-based school counseling. That was Curley Johnson's ideas. Number 7 talks about results-based school counseling. And then we were still really comprehensive developmental school counseling. That's Norm Geisber's. Those programs, those ways of thinking about things, people were still trying to understand which would be the best approach. And then, of course, the ASCA national model really pulled all of those things together. So there's the top 10 from 10 years. And we're going to talk at the end about how we see things changed. And then Liz is going to now talk about the current study.
So when I approached Carrie with this idea almost a year ago, we really wanted to first make sure that the experts that we invited were folks that were included in the original panel or had the opportunity to lend their expertise on how that process had changed or what they had seen differently over the last 10 years. And we also looked at the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference Advisory Board. This process by determining who to invite to be on the expert panel. And we looked at the original panel and invited members so they could give their perspective on what had changed over the course of 10 years. We also looked at members of the Evidence-Based School Counseling Advisory Council. We wanted representation from national leaders and intentionally sought out to have some diversity on the panel in terms of gender and also race. So we sent out invitations to roughly 45 potential experts, and we had 31 members who had eventually completed at least one of the 3 rounds of the Delphi study. So here are just kind of a representation of the different roles that the experts were currently involved in, and some state representation. So again, we tried to make sure it was balanced across the nation. And so the research process, for those that aren't familiar, it involves 3 rounds. And the first round involved taking a look at the top 20 questions from the original Delphi and determining how relevant those questions were today. We had a strong response rate of 74% in that first round. In round 2, we asked the researchers to combine the rankings from the top 20 and then add any new research questions that were a priority for themselves or the profession or with doc students that they might be working with. Again, we had a strong response rate, about 90% return. And then round 3 used a combination of the questions that had been ranked as a priority, the new questions that had been shared with Carrie and I, and then we did we had the hard task of trying to synthesize and come up with an exhaustive list of questions for the panel to once again rank, and this time we asked them to rank 30 of the top research questions. We had a response rate of 74%, and what we're going to share with you today is preliminary data because we are still waiting for a few of the expert panels to return their responses to us, which we will include and then share with everyone again through a publication, which we'll share more about towards the end. So we tried to organize the questions into 7 domain areas, and they all involved counselors' work at different levels. So the first was identifying the best practices and documenting school counselor effectiveness, the role of the research in the profession, identifying the most effective educational and supervisory approaches, advocacy, collaborations, and then general questions. And the questions within each of the domains also varied, but we tried to make sure that we didn't frame the study in any one direction, kept it open as much as possible to reflect what we had been receiving from the experts. So here are the rankings. And we tried to use kind of a golf ranking in terms of if there was 2 questions or more that met a particular threshold in terms of frequency, then we didn't try to rank within that particular rank as to put one above the other, but wanted to make sure that we acknowledged that there's multiple experts that felt that similar questions deserved a similar ranking. So here is the questions. And towards the end, we will share with you the comparisons between the 2005 and 2015 studies.
The hashtag or the number and then over 23 means what number of the expert panel answers that we had out of the 23 that we got so far felt like that question was one of their top 30s. So in other words, the two questions that were ranked 14 out of 23 said this is one of my top 30 questions. And I think that's important because it shows that it's not like everybody was saying this is the number one question. There was not complete consensus around top questions, and I think that's kind of exciting and interesting. There really was a range of answers, and people felt like there were a lot. There was a nice range. I think as a researcher, there was a sense of different people prioritizing different things.
Absolutely, and you can see here that that data is included, but it appears in a different level as it did originally. I think that we had answered some more questions about data in that 10-year period. So I'm going to move on to the second one here, and then the third ranking. And we actually stopped at the questions that were ranked at 30 because that gave us, went to 36 of the questions that were ranked, which were the top 7 questions overall. I'm just giving a little time here for folks to actually read the questions.
And Liz, would we be able to send out a copy of the PowerPoint along with the video too? Is that something that you can share?
Absolutely.
Great.
So here we get to the general questions. So in summary, with this preliminary data, 12 of the top questions came back as identifying best practices. This was categorized by work that's actually done on the ground or the front lines by practitioners within the school building. Domain 2, we had 6 questions, and that was how school counselors went about documenting their work or effectiveness, either in delivering interventions or planning programs. So program evaluation would also fall into that category. The role of research in the profession, we had 5 questions related to that, along with 2 questions in advocacy and 1 question regarding collaboration and partnership. Interestingly, we didn't have any in that top 7 ranked questions that dealt with identifying the most effective educational and supervisory approaches, and then also some of the general questions were not selected. And I think that what this speaks to from my end is that the experts really were taking a view from what's actually occurring on the ground and what would make the work of school counselors more acceptable or legitimate for them to continue to do the real good work that they're doing, versus with Domain 4 being more of a counselor educator, the work that we do in terms of providing supervision. Carrie, would you want to comment on the general research domains and your impressions?
I think that the place where we really need good research is what are best practices in schools. What's the best way to provide college counseling or career counseling or social emotional education or academic support. So really needing more information about those things. And then once we have more information about what people are doing that's working, how do we then show and document that that's effective? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this will take us to Carrie, who will share a little bit about the differences between both of the studies.
So it's so interesting thinking about context and how context shapes the work of school counseling. And I think it's important to say that we need to pay attention to the context, and we also need to think about what's bigger than the context and not just be reactive to that. I do think this time around, what we saw was that college and career readiness questions are ranked higher, certainly with Reach Higher and the support of Mrs. Obama. That's been a critical piece for recognition for school counselors, and people are really curious to see, well, how do we document our effectiveness in this area, and how do we figure out what we want to do that's most effective. Social justice and equity questions are ranked higher. I don't know why they are. There's more social emotional related questions this time around. Last time there were many more academic questions in the top, and I think there's been some real back and forth in the profession about documenting how we impact academic outcomes, but also acknowledging that everybody in the building is trying to impact academic outcomes. And so school counselors have a unique role in the building in terms of impacting social emotional learning and social skill outcomes, as well as college and career readiness. And so there's a move back to focusing on the things that we do that really are not necessarily being done by very many other people in the building. And I think that's important, because I think it's all part of owning what it is that school counselors are doing, what's our unique role in the educational process, and what are the places, if we are focused too much on academic outcomes, then what's getting lost in terms of kids' learning and skills by the time they graduate from high school. And so I personally am super pleased to see this shift back to what I see as some of the areas, I would say a balanced approach. So looking at all domains and really thinking about, how do we address equity? How do we think about all kids? How do we make sure all kids are getting served? And how do we really focus on positive outcomes across all of the complicated aspects of who children are? Data questions were lower this time. I think we have a pretty good handle on how to use data. I think it's not a new thing. I think there's a general sense of it's important. We've got some books on it. We've got some ideas about how to do it. It's not that it's not important. It's just it's not a burning question anymore. We definitely see in 2015 that the only model that's talked about is the Ask a National model and RAMP, and not other models. And there's still some questions around thinking about, we have this model for program delivery and for program organization, and how specifically is it impacting student outcomes? How specifically is it shaping the effectiveness of school counselors? We don't really know that yet. I think that's important to ask. And in 2005, people were asking a lot of questions about program organization and structure, because there wasn't a really coherent model quite yet, where people hadn't really adopted Ask a National model. There wasn't clarity around what that was going to look like. And I don't think people have those questions anymore. We understand program organization and structure. People are using the national model, and there's a sense of this is a good model for how to organize things and how to think about what it is that school counselors are doing. And Liz already said this last point about no questions in domain 4. There were more questions about that in 2005. And what I would say is, it's an easier research question to ask counselor educators and to survey counselor educators. It's a much harder set of research to do work in schools, to look at student outcomes, to measure those, to do a really clear intervention and look at how that's impacting what's happening with students. And so, it is the harder research, but I think it's clear that it's what's needed, and that people don't want to just be focusing on counselor education. What would you add, Liz?
Yeah, I would piggyback on that, in that when we think of experts ranking the top 30 priorities for the field, that this was a good representation of looking at how we could prepare the next wave of school counselors to really do effective work in the schools. And I think that was the biggest takeaway for me out of this ranking.
Yeah.
Okay, so next steps.
We're going to be analyzing some of the secondary data, as Liz said, and really we've been trying to think creatively about how to use the study to support and promote the profession. So certainly a professional journal publication, but also something in the ASCA magazine for school counselors. We've been thinking about where we can put this data up, certainly on the C-SCORE website, but are there other places, and how can we disseminate it in a way that supports school counselor educators in doing the research and school counselors in thinking about what their questions might be. and we're open to ideas.
Absolutely. And one of the aspects about the secondary data that we asked the counselors or the expert panel to rank was whether they thought that the research question that they selected was something that was a priority for the profession, something of personal interest for the expert, and then also something that perhaps a graduate student could work on, recognizing that not all the experts were part of or had a doc program in their programs. And so our hope was to be able to create research networks where somebody who has that desire to answer that research question can be matched or be have the opportunity to collaborate with other educators or practitioners, so that we are expanding the field and making this something that everyone who's interested can contribute to, and we can create those connections with others within the field.
So, Erin, you asked about in another 10 years, will we do another Delphi? And the answer is sure. The two ideas we had at the bottom of this, just more thinking about dissemination and communication, is maybe do an ongoing annual session at the evidence-based conference, thinking about what research questions are people focusing on or doing research on, and what are new questions maybe that people feel like are important. We are going to post the research interests on C-SCORE. We're going to post the larger set of questions, and where we have permission from the panel experts, if they're interested in having their name next to an area of interest, and we can sort of have people put their names on that, but also just take a look at the larger set. So we're still trying to figure out how to connect people to the questions and to each other. And we're sort of excited about that. I think that's a real opportunity for collaboration and work across the field.
Definitely. I know that as I have reviewed your work around the Delphi study, one thing that sort of stands out to me is that this might be the hook for creating a stronger pipeline of counselor educators straight out of school counseling. Because I think that what we're looking for with the evidence-based practice is going to come from doctoral students who either are or have been school counselors, and for them not to necessarily, go off into directions that are outside of this set of questions, but for them to understand that really what we want in future counselor educators are people who know how to do this kind of research and who can even use some of what they were doing, a year or two ago or currently as a school counselor as the focal point of their research. So I really like the fact that it sort of helps maybe create, this pipeline that we definitely need on the education side of the field.
Well, I would love to see people use these questions as dissertation questions. Mm-hmm. Some of them are probably too big for dissertation questions, but especially when we post the larger list, there are some really fabulous questions that many people thought were important that didn't just make the top 27. I will say this, another difference, I didn't say this yet, between 2005 and 2015 is that the sheer volume of questions that were generated and the really intelligent and thoughtful research questions that were generated by the Delphi experts was much more extensive. So I think as a profession, even though we had a lot of this, there was overlap between the two expert panels, the thinking in the profession has really progressed. People have gotten more sophisticated about how to ask research questions, what are the research questions that will really impact the field most significantly. And that's really exciting to see that as a profession we're growing and I think, Erin, your point is very well made, that the next generation to sort of see that develop even more so is very exciting.
Definitely.
Right. I also would add that each of the experts, had a very difficult task. Again, we encouraged them to respond through email, through texting, and we weren't shy about bugging them. And I do appreciate each and every one of them who took the time to complete this difficult, task, certainly time consuming on their end. Each of the expert panels, I think, gave members gave their time, and I don't think that we can thank them enough for having completed this study with us. Along the lines of the research questions with new students that are coming through, doc students, I think that even the assistant professors that are actually on the in the counselor ed positions nowadays also can use this information if they are planning on conducting research projects through their own research agendas, but also submitting grants and helping guide other dissertations. So I feel like this is something that anyone at any point in the counselor education or school counseling field can use this to advocate for the profession, or at least use it as a springboard for taking their research to the next level.
All right.
So here is our contact information. And I think that both Carrie and I are available, if I can speak for Carrie, to just say if you had questions about the process or want more information about where we're going with this next part of our research, then feel free to contact us. And we are planning on submitting the final results through a publication within the next month. And we will share the final list and make that available to anybody who's interested through the different means that we talked about.
Excellent. Well, Carrie and Liz, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your expertise on the Delphi studies this morning. We hope that you will be able to join us on April 5th, which is Tuesday, for the call in case we have some follow-up questions. But really, this is very exciting, I think, certainly. And I'm hoping that the network can also find ways to support the Delphi study and the dissemination of the results. So again, thanks to both of you for doing this recording with me today.
Thank you.